There's no North Carolina budget deal in sight, but what parts of the budget could still pass this summer? And U.S. Senator Thom Tillis weighs in on the Israeli-Iranian conflict. This is State Lines.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting PBS-NC.
Welcome back to State Lines. I'm Kelly McCullen. We have a great show today. Thank you for joining us. Don Vaughan is here of the News and Observer. Senator Brad Overcash represents Gaston County. He's in C2. We have a rookie senator, Representative Phil Rubin of Wake County. Hello, welcome to State Lines. You're on with some savvy veterans this week.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Glad to be on here. Really appreciate it.
Glad to have you on. Thanks for accepting our invitation. Jeff Moore of the Locke Foundation joins us in seat 4. You've been here a time or two. Always great to see you.
Great to be here.
Well, there's a lot to talk about. We'll start with what isn't happening, which is a state budget bill being, approved. The House and the Senate budget negotiations appear to be at a stalemate. So if you follow state politics in North Carolina, lack of a budget deal, no big surprise. The current budget year will end on June 30th, but state law keeps the current budget in effect, so there's no government shutdown. Don't worry about that. And Dawn, other legislative business continues as we wait for a budget. But let's talk about the budget. Yeah. The big, beautiful budget not apparently going anywhere. Now we're hearing they may break it up into bite-sized pieces.
Yes, so here we are again. You know, at the beginning of every long session, there's hope of, things happening in a timely fashion, and then eventually it doesn't. And of course, the state law, you don't have to pass a budget by the end of the fiscal year. If raises come later, if there is a budget deal as late as almost Thanksgiving a couple of years ago, or not at all in 2019, raises would be retroactive. So that's kind of like the big concern of the state employees and the teachers whose base pay is set by the state is money. So they will get their money eventually, only if there's a deal. And raises have kind of been a big factor in past negotiations between the House and Senate. It's taxes this time, but not only taxes. So Senate Leader Phil Berger said that there's more to it. There's things like the Children's Hospital funding, what to do with lowering the job vacancy rate, eliminating some state jobs, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things to work out, and we're not even talking really about a lot of earmarks yet. So they're going to push through the rest of the policy they can before the end of this coming week, and then take a break. They haven't, as of Thursday, they had Berger and Speaker Hall had not set a date yet to when everyone would come back in July as talks continue.
Senator Overcash, I remember a day not so long ago, June 30th, you guys would sit up all night long, and by July 1st, that building would be empty for the next 9 months until the short session. This is the new era. So from the Senate perspective, why is it better sometimes not to make that deal with the House, keep fiscal policy right where it's at?
Well, I think, Republicans had the foresight several years ago to put laws into place that all the recurring funding that's going on right now in state government, that's going to continue, as Dawn said, until we get a new budget. So we don't have quite those pressures that you see in Washington. We're not facing any type of shutdown. Folks will continue to get paid, and government will continue to function. I do believe that next week we will likely see a funding package on some of those critical things that may be expiring. So the two chambers are working that out now. I think you'll see that. I also think you'll see something on Hurricane Helene relief soon.
I've heard that is promised. It's the next segment up. But Representative Rubin, to your point on the budget negotiations, the House Democrats most of you jumped on the side of the House budget and said we'll see what happens if the bill's reached. What do you think about the budget situation? Is the state going to be just fine if we don't pass a new bill soon?
I don't think that, because there's a couple of reasons. I like that we have the bill in place or the law in place that continues funding, but there are actually costs that we face when we don't get a budget. So sure, those pay raises would be retroactive, but people don't know if they're getting them. And so imagine teachers. Right now we're worst in the region for starting teacher pay. We might, if the House gets its way, jump up to first. But if you're a new teacher deciding where you're going to live and work, you don't know the answer to that yet. And now's the time you might just move to Virginia or South Carolina. State agencies don't know how they're going to be funded, what positions they're going to have. And there are some fundamental changes in both the House and Senate budgets on how agencies will work with like vacant positions. And so that uncertainty does actually carry a cost, and we really need to get to a place where we have answers.
Has your caucus leadership had any input with the budget process on the House side, or did House Republicans go in with their bill and just happen to come out with something that you could figure out a way politically to halfway support?
I think it's kind of in the middle. I think that there have been instances where folks in the Democratic caucus and leadership have had input on it. I don't think it's as much as I would like to see in this body, a collaboration between, we got to actually see the budget right before it was voted on, the actual final piece. And I would like for it not to work that way. But that said, I'd be lying if I said, oh, there was no collaboration whatsoever. And there's, like you mentioned, there's some things that we like in the House budget in particular.
Well, time-honored tradition is you don't see the budget till it comes out, Jeff. There's been many, many cycles, and Democrats have led this. They didn't release the budget either. Yeah. So, it's always a surprise. And, people in North Carolina, their families are just out of school. It's beach time. It's mountain time. Go back to the mountains and tours. And state budget stalemate. And how many people are paying attention, you think, out there? And when will they start paying attention to the lack of a state budget?
Yeah, I think maybe when they actually come back from any expected break and actually start cobbling those pieces together to really get them across the finish line. This is not a surprise, as you mentioned. I think of the Charlie Brown, Lucy pulling the football out right before he was about to kick it every year. And so we have some young reporters at Carolina Journal, as part of the John Locke Foundation, that I told them when they first came on, when they were thinking about the fiscal year deadline and when we'll have a budget, I said, just wait. Even if there are promises that we should have this done by Independence Day or by the end of June, in the last 10 years, this is a rare occurrence that it actually happens.
Another thing to note when there is a deal is that the budget in North Carolina, at least, is not just about money. There's going to be policy in there, some policy that has money tied to it, but a lot of times whatever doesn't get through the end of session will be some sort of deal that is in the final budget. And Senator Berger said the other day that they're talking about budget pressures, that they're pressure points between the House and Senate, and that includes things like policy that aren't just raises and taxes and the typical funding fights.
Yeah, which will draw people's attention back in after they return from their summer vacations. Everything we start haggling those things out, the policy that impacts those families, they'll start paying attention.
Representative Rubin, this next topic's to you. Where state Democratic leaders have raised a point this week: the future Hurricane Helene recovery may stall in the absence of a new state budget. Of course, Senator Overcash just spoke to that. House Republicans have always proposed a separate Helene recovery bill from the state budget bill. Senate Republicans baked it in as part of their just combined budget bill, just one big bill. I hate to use that term more than once in one show. Senate Republican leader Phil Berger is promising Helene recovery will be addressed before legislators, quote, go home from the legislative session. And Senate Democratic leader Sidney Batch has floated the idea of using parliamentary procedure to force a floor vote, at least on the House bill, I believe is how it would work. So we get it. It popped up on the radar. Republicans immediately jumped in to say, don't worry about that. Is that good enough?
Well, it'll be good enough when we vote, and when they vote on it, or we get a bill back from the Senate. But I'm heartened by that. That's certainly good because that bill, the bill the House passed, it's $565 million, and all the things we were just talking about, where we have continuing resolutions essentially in place, none of that applies to our friends in Western North Carolina. The funding that they need is not automatic. If we don't take action, they don't get that funding. And one of the things I would emphasize in that bill, and it's a great bill, it was unanimous in the House, Republicans and Democrats, $60 million to help small businesses that have lost substantial profits due to the disaster. And if a small business goes out of business, it doesn't come back. So if we take an extra month or two to get this done, that's a lot of businesses that will finally go under. And the character of Western North Carolina is small business. So we need to get this done. I hope we're going to get it done next week. That would be great.
Senator Overcash.
So we've already appropriated nearly $1.5 billion to Hurricane Helene relief. We have been very quick in getting that out. There are still significant funds from those appropriations that have not been able to be spent yet. Also, on top of that, we are going to release and vote on and pass another Helene package next week. And yes, the Senate, we certainly put it in our proposed budget, but you can put things in more than one place if you want to make sure it passes and that it's important. So we have that in the budget, but we're also going to release a separate bill and vote that out next week.
I think it's important to note that that was actually part of that's one thing with the budget debate that has resulted in something like a final before the end of the month, that the Senate wanted the Helene funding within the budget and the House didn't, and they've agreed to just run the separate bill.
Jeff, what the politics of this, you've worked in party politics, it's just two different ways of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So the Senate breaks it apart. It doesn't seem to be very controversial. It's just something the state will have to do.
Yeah, it's something, and then obviously once you pass these pieces of legislation, that is not the end point. It's not like the money is automatically in the places where it needs to go. Like Senator Overcash said, it takes some time to actually get those funds out to where they need to be, and you still got a lot of funds to deliver. So the difference in it being passed when the budget gets passed, or if it gets passed in a separate bill, may not have a real functional effect down the line as this kind of takes its time to filter through.
How much do you think government funding of recovery can offset the lack of tourism and private dollars and people traveling west this summer and fall?
I think it could be a small help, but really it's going to be the awareness campaign that Western North Carolina is open for business again, and pushing that idea all summer long, and maybe switching some of these beach trips to a mountain trip, or maybe doubling up and going both to the beach and the mountains and enjoying all parts of the state. But this is something that I definitely need.
Representative Rubin, how should future state revenues, this big debate about the fiscal cliff that the state may run out of over collections or surplus, do you think that could affect Hurricane Helene recovery? Should it?
Well, I think it could, in the sense that we're seeing this progression of divesting from the state. As more people are moving in, we're not growing revenue with it, and it costs more to have a state with more people in it in terms of government services. What that means for Hurricane Helene recovery is if we don't continue to have the revenue to build roads, to build infrastructure, that's going to put pressure on the western part of the state where we need extra money. I think the total recovery that we're behind there is like $30 billion. And obviously we're hoping that a lot of that is going to be federal money that's going to come, but that isn't secured yet. And so at the end of the day, I think we need to start from a position of funding the recovery fully through federal and state money, and funding our infrastructure in the state fully, and then talk about how revenue gets us there.
The idea that revenue in North Carolina has not grown as our population has grown is just fundamentally false. We have had increasing revenue, increasing amounts in our budgets for 10 years plus, all driven both through growth, but also through our corporate and personal income tax cuts. Every time we've done that, revenues have continued to increase. It is a time-honored and proven tradition in North Carolina, and our revenues are continuing to go up.
Yeah, it's certainly true that revenues have gone up, and that wasn't what I was saying. I'm more saying that the revenue is not growing with the population. And anybody who's waited in the line at the DMV, which hasn't really grown since 3 million people moved in, has seen that. But the state budget director, noted that we're headed towards a $3.5 billion deficit if the tax cuts continue at the rate they are. That was actually before the May revision that actually makes that picture worse. And so ultimately, if you balance the budget, you're going to have to cut that money from the budget. And 10% cuts in a state that's $15 billion behind on road construction is something that I think people are paying costs of. It's ringing as a tax cut, but what people are hearing is I'm spending more on healthcare, I'm spending more on education, I'm spending more on roads, on time on the road. So people are paying the cost, they're just paying in a different way.
Roy Cooper appointed the former Democrat Party chairman as the DMV commissioner, and he wrecked the system. That is not a revenue problem. That is a gross mismanagement of a state agency.
And it should be noted as well that the consensus forecast here has a history of embellishing the trouble that we may be in going forward. So I think it's to the tune of $7 or $8 billion that they've kind of undersold what the revenues are going to be. So you should take a little grain of salt with that as well.
It is a forecast, right? And, and I think that is, the Senate Republican position with Berger, the disagreement between Berger and Speaker Hall now. And that Hall, it got all the Democratic support, which really is like the biggest budget story of the year, I think, with even the Democratic leader voting for the House budget written by Republican budget writers. But this divide, I think, is what's going to make the budget battle drag out this summer with these future tax cuts and what the trigger should be.
All right. North Carolina's U.S. Senator Thom Tillis offered some comments about the Israel-Iran conflict this week. He spoke to CNN on Capitol Hill on Thursday. President Trump has said he'll give diplomacy 2 weeks before deciding whether he'll authorize U.S. military involvement. Here's Senator Tillis on deferring to that presidential leadership.
The only thing that's going to fix Iran is regime change. The mullahs are murderers. It is time for regime change. And I believe that this president should be given a fair amount of leeway to effect that.
Jeff, I don't normally bring federal issues into this state, but Thom Tillis is out there. He loves a microphone these days, and he's saying regime change. That's big rhetoric when it's Israel and Iran.
Yeah, and the writing may be on the wall already for him to be reading whether or not we're specifically pushing regime change in Iran. That seems to be something that's going to come. They're in a very, very weak position as far as the IRGC and the Ayatollah's leadership there in Iran do not have a lot of great support at home. And with this conflict going on between Israel and Iran and all the pain that they're feeling, it's going to be moving in that direction. So Tillis may be kind of jumping on something that's already moving here, but also backing up President Trump, which sometimes he's at odds with. So you kind of see him jump back on that train when it is in the more traditional kind of view of making sure that we can get some friendlier administrations over in the Middle East.
Senator Overcash, I want to ask you about North Carolina being a huge military state, probably what, number 2 behind Texas or California. I've lost the statistic in my mind here on the fly, but anytime there's a foreign involvement, it's going to involve Fort Bragg and maybe not Lejeune in this case, but Lejeune in this case. So how can North Carolina's economy and its leadership be prepared for an involvement that's so many miles away and likely we will not see Iranian troops in North Carolina?
Well, you know, North Carolina, the world's most military-friendly state, and our folks will be ready, whether they're coming from North Carolina or coming from elsewhere, if called upon. But you know, I don't believe it will. I don't believe it will escalate to that point, and you know, certainly continuing to pray and support Israel. You know, you have these two countries at war now, and you see Israel bombing military targets and assets, nuclear weapons facilities, and then you see the other side, which I can categorize as only as pure evil, firing missiles into civilian populations. I've been to Tel Aviv. It is a large city center. Iran recently shot a missile into a hospital.
Yeah,
I mean, this is just such a ridiculous situation.
Messaging, though, in D.C., all eyes are on the Middle East again, and we still got trouble back here at home. We need recovery efforts as per the last segment. How do we keep our voice out there in D.C. that North Carolinians need help before we maybe go to war? I don't know. How should I articulate this?
I think this is an area where we can do many things at once. And, you know, we'll absolutely, I really hope we don't end up at war. The regime in Iran is brutal. It's repressive. I won't be sad to see it go. But I don't think our success rate at regime change is very high. And I don't think Americans want to be in a war with Iran, but we also can't have a nuclear Iran. So I think we're going to have to pay attention to that. But I actually don't think that even takes away the attention from things like disaster recovery in North Carolina. We have the money to do that. We can do that. I do hope we'll continue pressuring the federal government to make those funds available quickly for us. It really impacts folks. And, you know, as you said earlier, getting the money out where it's needed is that's a logistical challenge. It's hard. It takes time. The sooner we get it, the sooner we can get relief for folks. But again, we can do two things at once.
I could not agree with my colleague anymore.
Dawn, Senator Tillis's profile elevating. He's on national, international television a lot these days, and just saying something like that gets our attention at home. But surely it's across America.
Yeah, I think Senator Tillis is just a really interesting politician from North Carolina. You don't always know what you're going to get from him for what he says. I think he speaks his mind a lot more than maybe some other politicians, although, of course, he has the pressures of both his home state and the party and Trump to work out. But I think talking about any war, you know, lately our involvement in wars isn't very short. And if you think about what the long-range impact is on, of course, the globe, but the United States and the people from Fort Bragg and elsewhere that are actually going to be involved in it, and especially this region of the country, it's not going to be for a few months and then we're done. It's going to be many years.
Do conservative voters want us in another foreign war right now? That's splitting the Republican Party just a bit.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any appetite for ground troops, a full-scale war. Now, I think the question really is going to become, do we utilize some of those more sophisticated, heavy-duty bunker-busting bombs, for lack of a better term, on some of the more difficult to get to nuclear facilities? I think that's probably what's on the table more than some sort of large-scale war.
Senator, stay right there. The state Senate has passed a hemp regulation bill aimed at setting age limits on purchases and banning synthetic cannabis products. Only adults 21 and older could purchase hemp products, and many products that you find right now in smoke shops and gas stations would be outright banned from the shelves unless those products underwent rigorous testing and meet new standards. House and Senate differ very slightly on some bill terms, but you have Attorney General Jeff Jackson on board. Senator Josh Stein support the new regulations. This is bipartisan, Senator Overcash. What's wrong with letting the weed be out there, the cannabis products be out there on the retail shelves?
Yeah, so right now North Carolina is the Wild West for these types of products. There's no regulation on them. There's packaging that is clearly geared toward children. Even products that are labeled a certain thing, there's no guarantee that what's in there is what's labeled. Many products unlabeled. I mean, it really is the Wild, Wild West. It's a dangerous situation in North Carolina. And I'm so thankful for this bipartisan push to just ban these synthetic cannabinoids and things like Kratom and some of these other products. But the non-synthetic cannabinoids, certainly getting a hold of that. Don't market them to children. Don't allow it to be sold anywhere at any time with no labeling and no testing. I think this is very important. It's high time, and I'm thankful for the bipartisan push on it.
Representative, is it really the Wild West, or is it just the market meeting the demand of the public? Because they always say that even marijuana of any legalization status in a state runs about 60-70% support. What's the difference in that and what you see in the store right now?
I think it's the Wild West, and it's my turn now to agree with my colleague completely. There's a couple issues. There's overdoses for kids, and that have skyrocketed in North Carolina and across the country because these products are like gummies are a thing that kids want to have. They look like candy. They're available for sale for kids. So I'm not against, what we're doing here is actually, I think, a really nice balance because we're not eliminating these products entirely. We're just saying that there's an appropriate way to regulate them so that they don't get in the hands of kids. I remember WRL did a study a couple of years ago where they tested products that they had bought at a gas station like half a mile from a school, and almost all of them were adulterated with other chemicals they weren't supposed to have or 10 times the limit they were supposed to have. That's a really serious risk for everybody.
This bill going to go through, Jeff?
Yeah, it seems like it has some strong bipartisan support, and we've got like water finding the lowest point. Some of the more crafty entrepreneurs are going to find those gray areas where the regulation just isn't there, and they're going to jump into it, and you're going to get a lot of market serving, and you're going to get a lot of messy things that don't really suit communities. And so I think you need to clean those up, and a standard regulation that applies to the whole state and allows everybody to operate around that and having safety first in mind and keeping it in adults' hands and out of children's hands is probably a smart approach.
I mean, it's the government's job to regulate things and put safeguards in place, and this seems to be what there is agreement on. This is twice now in one show that lawmakers, different sides of the aisle, agreed on things. And don't forget, there's also medical marijuana out there, which is Senate Rules Chair Bill Rabin's big issue, and I don't know if we'll see that this year or next year, but that's out there too.
Right. A 3-judge panel is hearing a federal case aimed at how North Carolina's legislative and congressional districts are drawn. The redistricting lawsuit targets lines drawn back in October 2023 that give North Carolina Republicans a 10-4 majority in Congress and all the majorities you see currently in the State House and Senate. The plaintiffs say minority voters were dispersed into white majority districts to dilute their voting strength, which generally would seem to be Democratic votes. Jeff, Republicans say race didn't play a factor into redistricting this time. Yes, partisanship did, and yes, partisanship is absolutely constitutional.
Yeah, it's deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra said. And you might wonder what year it is if we're talking about redistricting or other issues like voter ID in the courts and stuff like that. So this is a reiteration of the same suit that they've been bringing for years, kind of charging the racial bias and discrimination note. The Republicans on that side saying we're actually just looking at political data, and they've established some things in the courts already because of the previous lawsuits and say that they're operating within those parameters, but the lawsuits come all the same, which makes sense as well because the payoff for those interested groups, the plaintiffs here, the Mark Eliases, the NAACP, has been good politically. The messaging to tar and feather Republican map drawers as gerrymandering with a racial bias has been successful in the political consideration. So it's not a surprise that they've brought it again. What would be surprising is if we get all the way to 2030 without a court saying that you have to redraw some maps.
Representative Rubin, Democrats drew their districts very favorably before the ball got dropped in 2010, Republicans took over. So what's the difference today from what Democrats just did 20, 25 to 100 years ago.
Well, my view on this is really simple. Political, partisan gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering, it's all wrong. It shouldn't happen. It's not right when Democrats do it. It's not right when Republicans do it. It's not right when it's done in Maryland. It's not right when it's done here. And, and I know folks at the Locke Foundation have written about this in a really principled way about getting to fair maps. It undermines democratic legitimacy, and it also undermines accountability, which is the hallmark of democracy. If people can't hold their representatives accountable for the decisions they make, the whole system breaks down. And think about the North Carolina House, where I think Republicans got 48% of the vote statewide and have 59% of the seats. Accountability really breaks down. So Democrats may have done it in the past. They're doing it in other places in the country now, but you will never hear from me a position that says it's okay for anyone to do it, period.
Senator, when does you win? You have the political power. How does that balance against the minority party's vision of fairness?
Look, I cannot think of a more appropriate body to draw lines than a democratically elected legislature. I mean, we've been elected from Murphy to Manio, and that is exactly the instrument of the people's will. And some idea that you can't hold that accountable, I would hearken back to 2010. Those were Democrat-drawn maps. Republicans swept into power.
All right, that's the last word for this show. Thank you so much for being on State Lines. Very fast moving. Welcome to the show. Hope you'll come back, Representative.
My pleasure.
Hope you'll come back too, Senator.
Absolutely.
We'll see you two soon enough. Thank you for watching. Most importantly, email your thoughts and opinions to statelines@pbsnc.org. I appreciate you watching. I'm Kelly McCullen, and we'll see you next time.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting PBS NC.